Hey guys, welcome to the Real Estate Rundown with Shannon Robnett. I wanted to talk with you a little bit about a question that was posed just the other day. I was actually watching the Joe Rogan podcast with Kevin Hart. Kevin Hart was asking the question, why don't we ask the question? And why don't we learn? Joe Rogan responded with, a lot of people don't have the framework and they don't know how to get started. Man, two really huge truths right there. I mean, from two guys that are enormous in the industry, right? We all know, you guys both knew both of their names, right? You knew exactly who I was talking about. But Kevin Hart was asking the question of, why don't young people ask the question? Why don't they really seek to learn? And earlier in the podcast, if you've watched it, if you haven't, stop right here, go watch it, come back. It's a long one, but I think it's worth it. But we don't ask the question, and a lot of that comes down to how many times did we ask the question and we got told that's none of your business. We got told by the people that were breaking ground in front of us, which is part of what they're talking about, that you don't need to know that. Or we just never thought. We were so busy living our lives, doing our things, trying to create our world that makes it go round to pay the rent, to pay the gas bill, to pay for food, that we didn't have time to stop and ask the question. And we never did until it's too late. There's too much else going on. There's too many things happening. But at the end of the day, the reality is, why don't we ask questions? Why don't we learn? Why don't we dig in deeper? Why don't we find out things that we didn't know before and find the answer to them? Why aren't there things that intrigue us? And I think a lot of it comes down to exactly what was being talked about on that podcast. It comes down to mentorship. It comes down to fathers and sons and fathers and daughters and mothers and sons and the things that were talked about at my dinner table when I was a kid, the things that were discussed about deals and the future, and what if we sell this, and what if we buy that, and what if we build this, and what happens if we do this. And I wonder how much my kids experience that. I wonder how much your kids are experiencing that, or how much you did experience that. You know, it comes down to the question of, how do you start new things if you don't know how they're done? Where do you get that information? How do you go about finding a mentor? How do you figure out how to go from where you're at to where you want to be if you don't know what you want to be when you grow up? And I think it's important that we answer those questions. Where do you get the framework? Where do you find the things in life that you want if you don't know how to go anywhere? If you're financially illiterate, if you weren't taught that. So let's talk about mentorship, because if you're dealing with a proper source of mentorship, you're able to ask the question without having to worry about what they think about the question. You're just simply asking the question. And when you've asked the question, you're getting advice and you're sent home with homework. If you're my age, you grew up watching a Karate Kid. Everybody knew the moves. Everybody knew, wax on, wax off, right? But it was the mentorship, and it wasn't about answering the question with A plus B equals C. It was practice. It was, here's a scenario. Here's a thought process. What happens if you did this? What are you going to be able to accomplish if you do that? And I wonder how often establishing that framework is so simple, the people around us asking, how do we get more out of life? How do we do more with our life? How can we accomplish more? How do we own more of our time? Those are questions that you need to be asking. Then the question is, how do you get more time? How do you get relieved of the duties that are required to make the paycheck? How do we get from point A to point B if we don't know how to get there? How do we begin to learn financial literacy if we don't have any, if we weren't taught any? There's something I've done a lot of in my life, and I don't know that I regret any of it, and that's reading. I would challenge each and every one of you, if you need a list of books to read, you know where I'm at, find me. I'll give you a list of books to read. Where do you start? What are the things that you begin with that get you to the next step? How can you learn about something when you're not in a position to pay for thousands of dollars in coaching? You can buy the coaching classes in a book. You can buy advice in a book. Reading on the subject that you want to pursue is an incredible way to find out how to get better at it. Listening to podcasts is the modern version of a conversation, of a talk radio show, right? Finding out those educational things, seeking them out, and learning to be better about asking the questions, because I think a lot of times we're so embarrassed that we're going to get the wrong answer. And we've all been in the classroom where the teacher says there's no dumb questions, and then you hear 31 that sound really close to the definition of a dumb question, but it's about the process of taking in the information, learning from the information, and moving forward with the information. Being able to take that and process that. You know, there was a guy in my life that years ago I used to go and talk to about multifamily, and it was back when it was just a dream for me, and I was trying to learn from this man. At the time, he was pretty young, and I would always ask him, I said, you know, what is it that I can learn from you? And he would always, we'd always meet for lunch sometimes. Sometimes I'd take him to the airport when he was flying somewhere. He needed a ride and I wanted 30 minutes of his time, and that was a way to accomplish both things. But he always told me as we ordered our dinner or our lunch, he said, this advice is worth exactly what you paid for it. And I remember those words to this day, and I remember chuckling every single time, and they were priceless. But it was because I could ask the question and Mike would answer me honestly. It wasn't always a direct answer that, hey Mike, how do you finance this? Well, you got to do this and you got to find that, and you've got to get your equity stack, and you've got to pull these things together, and you've got to analyze your deal, and man, it's just too much information. But what I found was I found a place that I could ask the questions. I found a place that I could mentor myself, where I could become a part of the conversation. And out of that, I learned to get over the barrier of not learning because I didn't know. I got to the place where I could learn because I knew. And I could take the first step that led to the second step that led to the third step. And pretty soon, I was running down the road to success because of a mentor, because of someone that was willing to invest in me. I look back at that, and I'm forever grateful for him and several other people who have allowed me to call them a mentor and to ask the questions. You've got to come back to the framework. You've got to come back to that understanding, and you've got to know how to get started. You've got to know how to get off the dime. You've got to take the first step. And you know, I've listened to Brandon at Bigger Pockets. I've listened to quite a few people, and they all talk about just do your first real estate deal, and it sounds so easy. Oh, it sounds so easy. All you got to do is go borrow a couple $100,000 and sign your life away and personally guarantee it. What if it goes wrong? But there's so much truth in that. You know, there's so much truth in just taking that first step, finding the mentor, vetting the deal, and finally there comes a point when the analysis paralysis has to stop, and you've got to make the move. There's no way to take the fear out of it. There's no way to take that out. And pretty soon that fear changes to excitement. But I would encourage every one of you to take stock of where you want to go, what you're trying to accomplish, and what you're trying to think through, and identify a mentor or two in your life. And that could be very simply people who have something more than you have gotten to a place that you want to get to, that have accomplished things that you've wanted to do. I don't care if that's someone that scuba dives on a regular basis and that's something you wanted. Spend the $9. Buy them lunch. Figure out if there's more you can learn from them. Figure out how they got started. Read and continue to learn and continue to try and mentor with people who know more than myself. And it's amazing that every time I ask the question, I get an answer that leads me to another question. But the only thing I can say is that every question gets a little bit deeper and a little bit more in depth, and there becomes more substance to the framework that I'm building on which to project the film of my life. So here I am, I'm asking a question, and my worldview is only so big, and then I've asked another question, and my worldview opens up because I've explored this option, and I've gotten to that option, and I've talked about this option, and things are starting to come through where I'm getting things on track, and I'm starting to really put this together. And the framework gets bigger, and the screen gets bigger, and so does the film. So I would encourage you guys to look around you at the people in your life that are doing the things that you want to do. And I want to challenge you to ask them how they did that. How did you get here? What was required? What was the exceptional feat of daring that you did that got you over your fears to this place? How did you do it? And then ask them the simple question, thank you for lunch. Do you mind if we continue the conversation? And continue to build that up to where you're continuing to grow yourself. Because it's only out of that growth that you're going to reach a place where you're able to become emotionally and spiritually free. Because you've got the information to understand what that freedom is. So guys, I want to thank you for your time and for stopping by the Real Estate Rundown. I would encourage you all, again, find a mentor. Find someone to ask the questions of. Buy them a coffee. We'll talk to you next time on the Real Estate Rundown.